Yeah. Welcome to I'm Not Joking, the podcast where a behavioral scientist examines what it's like to live a humorous life. Glimpse into the lives of the funniest people in entertainment, business, and science as your host, Dr. Peter McGraw, explores their habits, motivations, and secrets to success. Get ready to fire up your brain and your funny bone. Now, here's your host.
Welcome to I'm Not Joking, the podcast that looks at the lives of funny people. I'm Peter McGraw. Today's guest is Solange Castro. Solange is a stand-up comic and published playwright. She recently released an album, A Journey of Self-Discovery, under the new comedy label Radland Records. She's currently writing her memoir about salsa dancing called Salsa Chica, How I Learned to Dance Salsa and Avoid Real Life. You can get to know her by visiting solangecastro.com, where you can see her blogs, which date back to 2003.
When I was 12.
Welcome, Solange.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Solange, if you weren't working as a comedian or a writer, what would you be doing? I guess you're going to say dancing, but maybe not.
If I didn't have to worry about paying bills.
Beauty of this question is people can take it wherever they want.
I mean, the thing is, comedy doesn't pay my bills. So
what pays your bills?
I work in advertising. I've been a freelancer for 12 years, so I have found a way. It's not for everyone. I wouldn't recommend it, but I have found a way to make time and energy to pursue these creative passions. However, I will say it's all with the goal of someday earning a living doing
Okay,
it.
of course.
But what would I be doing? Probably taking dance classes. I would probably take classes all day long. I would take like volleyball, tap dance. I would just be a permanent, just like student. That's probably what I would do.
All right.
It's not
Lifelong
very
learner.
exciting. Yeah, but nothing hard. Just nothing like intellectual. Just like fun things, and always be a beginner at all of them.
That's great. Let me make a case for not beginner. Let me make a case for intermediate.
Okay. Intermediate's good too.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'm just thinking about this from this sort of kind of...
I understand what you're saying, because with a lot like salsa dancing, like it wasn't fun until I passed the beginner level.
Yes.
And I agree. A lot of things, like I took a volleyball class today, and it was like I played in high school enough so that I'm not a beginner, but like that being a beginner is the most awkward.
Yeah.
It's a growing phase.
Yeah, I just think like you just don't know enough. You can't really get into the depth. Anything. I mean, pretty much anything that's physical, intellectual, has a creative component to it, has depth, right? So, you name the thing, and even something as simple probably as Pong, the old video game, has some element that once you get past some threshold, it starts to become really engaging, where you don't have to think about it as much. You can start to play.
I would argue
Yeah,
and I feel like in my
volleyball,
life,
certainly.
I have everything I've done so hardcore, like comedy, salsa dancing, writing. I mean, I've just thrown in it. I think the idea of just being like not that good at something appeals to me at this point.
It sounds like you would be retired.
Permanently retired. I basically live that way. But the bills get paid and no one pays them but me. So somehow it happens.
I think you are being generous in saying you're already retired. I think you're saying that more for comedic purposes than for anything, because
it's more of a dream.
Because our mutual friend Jen O'Donnell, it's amazing how often Jen's name comes up on this podcast.
Well, she's the reason why I am here.
That's true. We were talking about her beforehand. You are now the, I think, fourth or fifth jump-inner, as I would call them. That is someone who says something before I say welcome to the person. And you're in very good company.
Rude.
No, I actually don't think it's the case. I've been fussing around with this idea a lot. So first of all, it's typically more accomplished people who do it. I sometimes have brand new, fresh comics on, and I often have many non-comics, certainly people just who are funny in the world of business or science or whatnot. So first of all, it's always comics. And it tends to be more accomplished rather than less accomplished.
I'm also impatient, and I just want to go like straight, like I'm always ready to go straight, which is probably really serves me well in writing jokes. It's about economy and going like straight to like the meat of what you're talking about.
Yeah, getting to it. So you joined Jen in good company with Neil Brennan and Jimmy Carr. So I'm not criticizing in any way. Actually, I think there's like an akin story to like this researcher did some work on employees and whether they had downloaded Safari or Mozilla's Firefox rather than using the browser So it's Safari and Explorer versus Chrome, whatever, but basically going to some third party rather than relying on Microsoft or Apple's Explorer. Excuse me, I'm really screwing this up. Search tool, a web browser. What they found was the people who did that, who deviated from the status quo, from the norms, were more successful in a lot of ways. They just have this openness to new experiences and so on. So I'm wondering out loud, is the jumping in the sort of comic version of...
This is like turning into like a really interesting therapy session.
I have no skills in therapy.
I mean, this is like going really much deeper than I thought.
This is what happens when you do a podcast with a behavioral scientist. So there's a study that looks at employees, basically their engagement, their performance, and so on. And they find this very fascinating correlation. And I'll put it in the exhibits. My question that I'm asking, and this is based on a very small sample, is the person who deviates from the script and jumps in with a joke, a question, whatever it may be, do they have this special something that makes them a better comic?
Short answer, yes.
Of course.
Long answer, I mean, the stereotype of comics being screwed up or whatever, coming from really kind of backgrounds where they may have had a lot of challenges is true to a large degree. And I know my family, and I kind of had this breakthrough recently because I teach stand-up comedy. And a lot of times, as you know, because you're a teacher, when you're teaching, you realize things about yourself. And my family, my dad had a large family, and everyone is really alternative, like very entrepreneurial, very independent. A lot of women. He has 4 sisters, and they also are all hilarious. And what I realized in my comedy class was that being funny at the expense of anything was valued.
Even yourself.
I don't mean to be negative about my family, but it's not necessarily like what's going to breed like the greatest relationship between people. But it will make for a really funny gathering and really funny people. I just realized one night that, and even on both sides of my family, being funny was really respected, really valued. And also being kind of independent in your thoughts and having your perspective was respected. Like conformity is not necessarily, especially in my dad's family. I mean, I have 4 aunts and they're all like, one of them started her own business like with pressed flowers that she sold on Telegraph Avenue. And just the kind of like, nobody told her like, you can't do that career. So I had these models of people just kind of like going off doing whatever they wanted. And that totally prepared me to be a stand-up comic. I mean, it bred me for this.
It's a rather entrepreneurial lifestyle, career.
100%. I mean, you could argue it's super lonely too, especially if you're not one to like make a lot of connections and relationships. I mean, being a female comic and being a woman who's like very relational oriented, I feel like I have been able to make these connections. But a lot of it is, no one's forcing you to do it. And especially if you're not getting paid, no one's saying like, you have to go out to this, drive out to this open mic and sign up and sit through like 20 comics and listen to some like horrifying ass-eating jokes. All right.
It's okay. I have an explicit
I think you should have a little chapter on that. Some nights I'm like, I can't possibly believe I've taken this for all these years. But there is something about it that must be like so gratifying for me that it somehow has been worth it.
I mean, I've had just a tiny bit of experience performing. I mean, I give a lot of talks, but in terms of performing comedy or in some way, shape, or form, when you're hitting, and if you hit a home run with something funny and those laughs hit you, I think that feeling alone can keep you going pretty hard.
I mean, I've done a lot of shows, especially recently, and I've been doing longer sets. And in order to do longer sets, I have to tell a lot of old jokes that I'm like, don't feel any connection to. It's just in my muscle memory. And sometimes I'll do a show and it'll go great and everybody will compliment me and the audience had a great time. And it was honestly like not that fun for me.
And even though you're getting laughs.
Getting tons of laughs. Yeah. And some nights, like, I'll just do an open mic and just try out new stuff. And it's just, that's like the greatest feeling in the world.
This is related to this idea of intermediate kind of, you're on your edge.
Yes.
You're on your edge when you're doing that open mic, when you're just doing your old jokes.
Thank you. You just explained it all to me. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I also not getting paid a ton of money, but I am getting people paid for their tickets.
Yes.
I really believe, and this is part of the problem we were talking before the podcast began, where I don't think comics really value the audience's time. And I really respect the fact that people are sitting there and paying attention to me. And I want them to have fun before I have fun.
Thank you for saying this, because I sit in this weird in-between space. I wouldn't call it a liminal space. I live in this world where I have 1 foot in comedy and 1 foot out of comedy. And this allows
Well, you're
insights.
a professor, so you have a whole other life.
I have a whole other life, but yet I've dedicated much of it in the last 10 years to decoding what you people do, right? What comics do.
Us weirdos. Yeah.
And I've done a little bit. I've done just a tiny amount, enough to, again, be dangerous in my opinions. But I'll be damned. I go to shows and I get that these comics are working on new material, and they should. And you were saying it's LA, so people are certainly doing it because they live here and they're working on their livelihood. And hell, half the time you haven't paid anything as an audience member. But to be critiqued as an audience member for not laughing at jokes, it just poisons the well.
Yeah.
In such a way.
I mean, you're addressing a problem that I've had this conversation about like 100 times in the last year about the state of comedy in LA. I mean,
so let's
to give you like
diatribe.
Yeah, I'll give you like a diatribe that's
Please.
very opinionated and judgmental and my own personal experience. But a lot of people I've spoken to would probably concur that we are kind of hitting like a new low of terrible comedy in LA. And part of the problem is that, and this was not the case when I started in like 96. And mind you, with no intention of becoming a professional stand-up comic, with no real dream of doing it. I just wanted to get up on stage and tell jokes.
I see.
But it was not considered, if I told my friends I was doing stand-up comedy, they looked at me like I'm trying to think of a good metaphor for it, but it was just uncouth. It just was not cool to do comedy. Fast forward to like, I don't know, 2008, 9, suddenly it became rock star.
I see, yes.
And everyone wants to be a stand-up comic
Yeah,
now.
like everybody's an entrepreneur. Everybody's a stand-up comic.
And I mean, I am aghast like how non-comedy, the thing is like everything in life when it's done excellently, it looks easy. And at its best, stand-up comedy looks like someone just got up and started talking into a microphone and everyone started laughing.
Yes, these ideas are appearing
You
out
have
of the
no
air.
idea how the sausage got made, which was for real comics, thousands of open mics or shows, writing jokes, refining jokes, rewriting for that flip, like breezy one-liner that seemed like they just thought of it in thin air. That so much work goes behind that. And no people, there really is an acknowledgement about it. Like there is for, say, like, if you see someone build a beautiful house, there's no question that took a lot of work. But it is a credible amount of work to be a stand-up comic who delivers consistent good jokes and consistently make comics laugh. I mean, I see a lot of people. And also, when I started, it was definitely a much more disenfranchised group of people who did comedy. Like, just real weirdos. And now there's a lot of clean cut people who middle class, like well adjusted. Everyone just wants to get up there and talk in a microphone. And that's okay. And some of them are funny, but like the tolerance of like bad comedy is really, really high. And I don't know why people don't just revolt or just start throwing like, I don't know. I've had all these ideas. Like I want to have a gong show mic, you know, or if someone's bad, you can just gong them off. Or I saw this one guy recently and he's actually a really sweet guy who's hosting and he'll just go for like the worst, like make fun of a disabled person, or he'll just the lowest, like non-thought out. And I guess, to be honest, it's just a reflection of the time we live in. I mean, it's a reflection of what is happening, what our president is doing. He's basically a stand-up comic, and his level of comedy is what you see at many open mics and shows. End of diatribe.
No, actually, I appreciate strong
you can
opinions.
Edit that as much as you want.
No, we don't edit. Unless someone says something, they'll get themselves fired. Okay, so let me offer a counterpoint.
Please. Because you're just like tapping into a well of frustration.
And the other thing is you live it, right? So you're both in the audience and you're on stage across all these things.
And it's also like my community.
Yeah,
and so it's just so disappointing.
Yes. So the counter to this, it's never been better. Okay. And the reason is when you have a big funnel, right? So when you have lots of shows and you have lots of people trying to do it on the clean, on the dirty side, on the mainstream, on the alt side, you kind of get those 4 boxes, so to speak. And you have lots of people out there tussling. You're going to have lots of people doing it badly, of course. But because comedy takes years to develop, when you have a big funnel, does it increase the likelihood of the genius? This is the classic counterpoint to overpopulation in the world.
So imagine a funnel coming from like a giant polluted well.
Well, okay, so that may be
I'm so negative. Okay, I have a better response for you.
Okay, well, please.
Than that. I don't know who told me this quote that may or may not have been said by Jerry Seinfeld or somebody else. It's all like the appropriation of it. I don't know where it came from, but a comic told it to me who is a good source, I'll say. I think it was Jerry Seinfeld who said that when he started comedy, there was 1,000 people doing it.
Yes.
And 100 were good.
Mm-hmm.
And then fast forward 20, 30 years later, 100,000 people are doing it.
Okay.
And 100 are good.
Okay, so first of all, what I know about the development of skills suggests that's not true. In the sense of like pick the career. If we want better engineers, we want more kids taking engineering as freshmen. In that sense, if we want the next Pavarotti, we need the triple, quadruple, multiply times 100 the number of people who are learning to sing.
I think you could be right. And maybe like 50 years from now,
Mm-hmm.
when we're all like living underground, we'll have like the funniest. We'll have so many funny people because of how many people are interested in comedy now.
Yeah.
It's literally exponential every year.
Yeah.
The number of people who are more interested in it.
Which is good business for me.
You're in a great field.
But I get your perspective because you're having to commune with these people. You have to compete with these people. You have to run through the gauntlet with these people. But for the average person who goes to 3 comedy shows a year, you know what I mean, and has Netflix, they're less affected.
So, I mean, I have this conversation with people who go see comedy shows all the time where they're like, oh, one person was funny, but then there was this guy. A lot of disappointment. But I remember when I started, and I don't know, I tell this story a lot, and part of me is like, it's probably 90% like, old lady, back in my day, things were so much better, and like totally take it for that. And it's true when you start comedy and you're a young person, you're going to have a lot of patience and you're going to watch a lot of comedy because you've never seen it before. Mm-hmm. So it's a learning process.
Yeah. And you learn from bad as well as good.
But also like in that time period that I started, comedy was not popular. I did not have any support from my family, from my friends, from my community. Mm-hmm. So the only people who supported it were the people I met in the community. And the only reason I did it was I didn't get any social validation for it. Was just because I had this passion, desire to do it. And I would go to the mic and sit there and watch every single set. And of course, some of them were not great, but also the host was always really hard. If you weren't prepared, if you weren't 100% into it, you kind of got beaten up a little bit. And it did make everybody a better comic. But there was also, when you think about it, the people that were in that room was like Zach Galifianakis, Tig Notaro, Maria Bamford. Like the list goes on, the great comics in a very small community of like 30 people maybe.
Yeah, I mean, look, I half agree in this sense of like, I also think like we should be a little too careful about the wistfulness of back in the day, right? Like, for instance,
it's probably that. I totally concede. It probably is.
Well, only because, I think about like support for diverse comics and so on. That's improving
Absolutely.
Opportunity and so on.
Absolutely.
But I've been reading about Richard Pryor. I've been doing a bunch of research on Richard Pryor. And if you read about Richard Pryor, you're going to learn about the Improv, the original comedy club in the United States, Bud Friedman's Improv in New York City. And the stories of how the Improv came about, like you just hung around, you hopefully became a regular. But the regulars at the Improv at this time, just like home run hitter after home run hitter after home run hitter, you know what I mean? Like, obviously, like Richard Pryor, but then also Jerry Seinfeld would be there, and
and that's
George
sort of
Wallace
how I feel about
so
that's how I look back on it.
And what happened was you had to bring your A game because if you weren't good, the Improv would get rid of you, right? So there was no screwing around.
And that's how I felt.
Yes.
Yeah, I felt like I had to bring my A game hard.
And if you're having to follow Richard Pryor, you better be ready. Right. And then I think there are these kind of places and times where communities come together and they make themselves better. You know what I mean? And so like French Impressionist artists in the cafes in Paris. And the idea was there was a small group and they were kind of frenemies. Like they both were encouraging and then competing with each other. I think the room that you're talking about with Notaro and Galifianakis has that element.
So for many years, I decided at a certain point that I didn't want to be a stand-up comic. Like I just didn't think it was healthy for me. Sorry, I almost fell. And I decided to take a break or just not do it. I wanted to pursue other things. And I mean, I was like 26 at this point because I started like when I was 23.
Yeah.
I still had all these relationships, and one of them was with Maria Bamford. So I was with her a lot, and I went with her to shows. At one point, I went to Australia with her and for the Melbourne Comedy Festival, and was always like listening to her jokes or laughing about stuff with her. Like we were always joking around. And just being around somebody that brilliant is like the best thing. It was probably better than like 1,000 open mics. I mean, just being with someone that genius and her comedy and her process and watching her. I probably learned more from being her friend than I did from doing anything else.
Yeah, that's incredible. Actually, I was just reading about research that's along those lines, which is in a kind of open floor plan, like these open offices that are super popular and super dumb. If you put someone near a toxic person, if you get seated near a toxic person, the likelihood that you get fired goes up. So that person's toxicity rubs off on you. If you get parked next to a superstar, the likelihood you get a raise and a promotion goes up. There's these contagion effects. And I have to imagine when you get parked next to a superstar, it's not just observing the person, but it's the interaction and learning from them. Speaking of, you've mentioned Tig Notaro and you mentioned Maria Bamford. I want to ask you about both of them for a second. Or actually, I want to ask about Maria and I want to tell a story about Tig. So Maria strikes me, I think of stand-up comedy as this very entrepreneurial venture. I mean, it's in vaudeville, they were the first kind of lean startups, right? Failing fast and so on. Maria seems especially entrepreneurial.
Absolutely.
So tell me how she is, because I have a few things, but I want to hear from someone who knows her well.
I mean, not only is Maria hugely successful and a genius comic, and she could not have done it in a more unique way. Mm-hmm. I mean, she's had the same manager, Bruce, for 25 years, but...
Can you describe the way she's done it for people who don't know her?
Well, she started out as a performance artist. Mm-hmm. So she was like shaved her head and she was playing the violin on stage in Minneapolis. And then I guess telling jokes, and then kind of gradually gravitated towards comedy. But she wasn't like, oh, I'm a stand-up comic.
Yeah.
You know,
she does voices.
She's like a one-person show, sort of like. She is very much like a performance artist. Yeah, she does all these characters. And then I think just stand-up fit her better. I mean, I watched her try to fit herself into Hollywood, or I've seen her bomb at clubs. I mean, at the Improv. And she would even say it. She would leave. She would be booked at clubs and just be like, I'm not doing this, because she felt so like the audience is.
It wasn't her audience.
Yeah. But she gradually found her audience and it's big. But she learned early on to just do what she wants to do, no matter what. And that's what's amazing, is that she gets paid to be Maria Bamford 100%. She's not pandering. She's not creating a brand. She's following her artistic muse always. Mm-hmm. And for that, I think she is one of the greatest role models for artists. And she's also got a very savvy business sense. Those two things mixed together. If she doesn't want to work with people, she don't want to do Target commercials. I don't want to be a Target representative. She made her choices. Mm-hmm. And there's just few artists I can think of, period, who have that much. I don't want to say integrity, like other people aren't honest, but just more like they're able to just completely honor their personal creativity and still be successful. I mean, she's genius.
It helps to be talented.
Insanely talented. Insanely talented, yeah.
So one of my favorite bits that I think really demonstrates Maria's, I think, genius if you like her, and then weirdness if you don't. She does the Old MacDonald, and then she does
the dinosaur.
The pterodactyl.
The pterodactyl, yeah.
The pterodactyl.
The dinosaur. Yeah, the pterodactyl voice.
It's incredible.
I've seen her do that to like stone cold silence. But I mean, it's brilliant.
I saw it and lost. I was watching at home on YouTube and cracked up laughing.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. I mean, it's anyone who does comedy will tell you that. Like my favorite is when everyone's, and this happens because I tell a lot of jokes that don't necessarily appeal to men because it's not their experience. And like, I'll be in a room full of like 20 guys and they're all silent and like two women in the corner are cracking up.
What's an example of a joke that might have that effect? Or even the premise. I know it's always weird to ask someone to tell their joke on a podcast.
No, I don't mind. I'm just like, now I'm like racking my brain. Okay, this joke, it's very hit or miss. But
wait, is it hit or miss or is it polarizing?
It's polarizing and hit or miss.
Okay.
It's very weird. But it's like I dated a much younger person and a guy. And I say all this stuff like, I normally don't date younger men because I can't sleep on just a mattress on the floor. It hurts my back.
I watched this joke on one of your videos.
I say that it's nice dating a younger person because I find that a lot of men my age are, I don't know, dead inside. And I just don't feel like it takes much to spiritually defeat a man. Basically, one failed relationship and a parking ticket.
Okay.
And it's a dark night of the soul for 2 decades. Women are much more resilient. We can lose jobs, relationships, and one trip to Ross just turns it all around.
I see. All right. And I can see why that doesn't land with the guys for 2 reasons.
Sometimes it lands with the guys great. They think it's funny because they identify but sometimes it just you can just feel like this injury, you know?
It might be a little too threatening.
Yeah. But I always want to walk that line. But then there'll always be women who this one female comic came up to me last night and she's like, I tell all my friends that joke.
That's great. I
hope I didn't offend you at all that joke.
No. I do get pissed when I get a parking ticket. But I'm one of those people.
You don't go through a dark night of the soul.
I don't. I live a good life. This will take us into a different direction than I actually want to get to. But look, barring any unforeseen tragedy, I see my dark days is behind me, which is nice.
That's awesome.
And so a few parking tickets is not going to bring me down at this point.
I'm really happy to hear that.
Thank you. Yeah, no.
I kind of feel the same way.
Yeah, I think middle age, here's my thing is middle age good or bad? I don't know. It's good if you've taken care of business in your life, and it's bad if you haven't.
Yeah.
And so youth can disguise lots of things, lots of problems, or delay them. But when you're middle age, if you have money problems, it's worse. If you have physical problems, it's worse. If you have relationship problems, it's worse. And so if you have career problems, it's worse. But if you're good at taking care of yourself for 20 plus years physically, and you've taken care of your career for 20 plus years, and if you started saving money early and you've learned good habits, then you can start to get to reap the benefits of all that hard work.
Yeah, I read an article that said that people who had good childhoods have a harder time dealing with adversity in life as opposed to people who had challenging childhoods. And I think
build resilience.
Yes, you're building something. And so I don't mean to say having a happy childhood means you're going to have a harder middle age, but it could.
I get you could. The issue is I remember I used to be a little jealous of friends who, first of all, everybody who looks like they have a happy childhood, they always have their issues. You know what I mean?
We're all alive.
Right. We all have our challenges. It's this idea of when people are like, comics are so screwed up. I'm like, hold on a second. For every comic who's up on stage talking about his alcoholism, there's 5 people in the audience who are alcoholics. It's just his alcoholism is amplified because he has a mic and you associate it with him. And so why didn't those other 5 people become funny? Most of those 5 people aren't. So alcohol is not a good path to funny in the same way that child abuse is not a good path to funny. Usually child abuse just makes you miserable and a horrible adult.
Somebody asked Steve Martin that. This was probably a 1980 or 70s. And he said, I know a lot of comics that are unhappy. I know a lot of doctors and lawyers
That's exactly
that are unhappy.
Right. I have a paper about this, so
okay.
I'm
trying to teach you. I don't know what I'm thinking.
No,
you've written the book on it.
She's holding my book that I gave her as a gift. No, actually, I'd never heard that, but
okay,
I do believe
I'm
that.
glad I taught you something then.
I don't know which one I want to talk to you about first. Let's finish with Tig. So I met Tig Notaro recently. I saw her perform, and I got to interview her afterwards. She has a very funny joke. The premise is, I think it's her father-in-law lives with her and her partner. But he's never completely unpacked. No one considers him as being a permanent resident of the house, but he clearly is. So she has this very funny, I'm not going to make it funny, of course, because I'm not Tig, but it's incredibly funny about the tension between him living with them, but visiting. He's sort of constantly visiting, so much so he lives out of luggage. He could leave at any moment. I think during the Q&A, I just said, very funny joke. Does this cause problems at home? You know what I mean? He does live with you. Does this
seriously, Tig?
Yes. And so, around the dinner table, does it come up kind of thing? And does it make you reluctant to tell the joke? So her first answer was, it doesn't make me reluctant to tell the joke, right?
Never for a comic.
I'm not surprised at all. And then she just goes, he doesn't listen anyways. And so I do think that this
is the next right answer.
So the issue is of course, you said comics can be really hard on themselves and others and so on. These are my words, not yours. And so they're often very hard on themselves. So they talk about their alcoholism, they talk about their failed relationships, they talk about their money problems, etc. What I argue, part of the reason why we think they're so screwed up, because they're willing to talk about those things, but they're also willing to talk about their family. So Nicole Blaine, who was on earlier, does very incredibly funny jokes about her family. You have some family jokes.
Quite a few.
And there's one that really stood out to me because you were talking about single living. So you're talking about not having children. Well, I'll let you talk about it, but that's no longer a problem because of your dad's behavior.
Oh,
it was once a
the
problem.
joke we were talking about.
Yes.
Yeah. So my father is married to a woman who's 4 years younger than myself. So
remarried.
I feel, third marriage.
Third marriage, okay.
I feel weird calling him dad, partly because my new stepmother's 4 years younger than myself. I feel like I should call him Steve, and she can call him dad. Okay. Then it's not so weird when I say things like, I'm hanging out with Steve and his wife, or Steve and his wife had a baby, because Steve and his wife had a child, and I have a 6-year-old brother now. And when I tell audiences, sometimes they think 75 seems a little old to have a 6-year-old, but I try to be supportive. I'm like, you know what? You go, Steve. You make your own grandchildren. It works better if I set it up that I don't have children. But you kind of did that.
I did,
So
yes.
I have a whole chunk about being single and not having... I have like a lot of jokes about not having children. Like a lot. So by that point, it's like well established.
Yeah. So my question is, are you ever reluctant to tell that joke?
No, he's been in the audience like 5 or 6 times.
And he finds it funny.
Yeah. I mean, in fact, one time... What I end up doing is like, let's give it up for Steve. And everyone in the audience cheers, and he loves it. He loves it.
That's very funny.
So what I always tell people, my dad, I went to Yale, like every parent's dream, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not impressed. He thought it was cool. He could tell his friends.
He's like, it's not Harvard, but...
Yeah. He was just like, oh, yeah, you're a big deal. You went to Ivy League. But when he came to see my show at the Punchline, and I told all these jokes, he brought all his friends. And I've just never seen him more proud of me.
Oh, that's fun.
Like, stand-up comedy is what has like impressed him more than anything else.
Yeah, it's usually the opposite. It's like, why are you not going to Yale to go pursue a career in stand-up comedy?
It's because on some level, he's a stand-up comic. He just does it with his friends.
I see.
And I think a lot of my family members are. So it's just like what I was saying before. It's just valued, and I've just never seen him proud of me until that night. I mean, to be like, I'm just so proud of you with like tears in his eyes.
So you were sort of teed up by your family to be a stand-up.
I don't
or at least
think so.
At least a funny person, no?
I mean, I never thought of myself as funny. I was an only child until I was 15 and my sister was born. And then I was always taking care of her and playing with her and watch her grow up. And like to this day, she thinks I am the most hilarious human.
My sister thinks I'm hilarious too.
Like
God,
I can just
just
say like hello and she'll crack up.
I love my sister for this so much. She thinks I'm so funny. It's great.
I know, and there is something about family just knowing you so well that they're just really you don't need to set up anything. Yeah. It's all the premise is all there.
Yeah, they know you're not a monster just because you're saying this.
Right. But I will say when I'm around my family now, I'm always like amazed at how funny everybody is. And I think as a kid growing up, honestly, I was always one of the youngest people in my extended family. I had like cousins and aunts, and I was always kind of quiet at family functions. And there was always somebody, usually like my cousin or my aunts, who were just really funny, telling a really funny story and everybody listening and laughing. So I kind of grew up just kind of like more observing, I think. And I mean, I joked around. My friends and I were always laughing about stuff. But I think it was something that I was like surprised. I was like, what? I want to do comedy? Like, it wasn't something I felt like, I'm going to be a comedian, that I had this really like strong sense of identity around.
I see. So you've never had children?
No.
You're letting dad take care of that?
Yeah, he's had 3 children with 3 different women.
Okay, so he's there's a line from Fight Club. He's setting up franchises. So
I have a joke about it. From 3 different countries. My mom was Mexican, Thailand, Philippines. So basically growing up was like growing up with an imperialist trying to colonize a third world all in one lifetime.
I like the 2 ways that we interpreted that same situation. You're like, it's imperialism, and I'm like, oh, he's supporting diversity.
You are a white male, so it's a different perspective.
It is true. It is true. I have never had kids, so I can be accused of neither of those things. So no kids. Most people do it. Why haven't you done it? By the way, I'm not saying this in the judgy way. Why haven't you done it?
No, I mean, my dad had 4 sisters, and I think one of them had a child.
That's interesting.
And one of them adopted. And then the ones who didn't just did whatever they want. I just feel like my other joke is like,
I'm asking because like I just had Nicole on recently, and so Nicole and you were both
right, and she had children, kind of youngish.
She has children and talks a lot about her children. You don't talk about your not having them.
I always say that like people always ask me why I don't want to have kids, and I'm like, it's fairly obvious. Basically, doing whatever you want, whenever you want, never gets old. If I was a guy, would you ask me why I don't have children?
Yeah, you do. As a guy who doesn't have kids, yes.
You would ask me if I was a guy. Because quite
No,
often the
what-
stereotype is
oh.
people don't ask men why they don't have children.
Oh, yes. That's a stereotype, I think.
I mean, maybe you would, but in general, society would not ask a man, why, why don't you want to settle down? Why don't you want to have children?
No, I get that
You
question.
Get it. So people ask you that a
People ask
lot? Or
Well, it's hard to measure that. I mean, certainly when you...
the pressure for a woman is unbelievable.
I agree with that.
And that's sort of why I tell so many jokes about it, because the pressure I felt to have children was unfathomable. And it really made me think that it made me question why my friends have had children. Because I'm like, if you don't have the role models I have had and the strength to resist, yes, you'll have children.
Because of the pressure.
Yeah. Or because you get pregnant, which also happens too.
Yes, it's true.
But yeah, I have all these jokes about being single and childless, or as I like to think of it, well rested.
Yes.
I mean, it blows my mind, the response I get. It's just like women are cheering. I have women coming up to me afterwards like, oh my God, I love those jokes. I hate all this Hallmark bullshit. Like, I stopped telling this joke, but I was like, I didn't mean to start a movement here. I don't want to be that right. But I do feel like those jokes tap into this like pressure. Those jokes tap into a territory that has not really been addressed very much in our culture.
I agree.
It's addressed a little bit. Not that feeling that I get when I tell those jokes or make that connection is partly what keeps me going. It's just like, oh my God, the things I'm saying are tapping into this unspoken feeling, and that's powerful. That's a real, like, hugely satisfying. That's a reason to keep going.
So I was eager to talk to you about, certainly I agree with you that the pressure, so it comes up a lot as a man for me because it's still unusual, but I don't feel pressure. I get questions, but I don't get true pressure about getting married and having children. So I certainly agree that it's asymmetric in that sense. I'm willing to talk about it. So I have a podcast that I did with Alonzo Bowden that we called Married to Comedy. So I talk about, Alonzo and I talk at length about his life and how he decided to be a bachelor at his age and to be kind of pursuing comedy the way he has. So I'm super interested in this type of stuff, and I can't give it away. I have a secret project I'm working on, but this is a little hint to any regular listener. This stuff we're talking about is related to the secret project.
Exciting.
I know.
Teaser.
That's the biggest foreshadowing I've done yet.
I'm actually not adverse to having children. Like, I would probably adopt. Like, it's not off the table, but I feel like a huge sense of purpose in like speaking, talking about these things in my comedy. Like, it really satisfies me because the other thing is I'm a feminist, like to the core of my being. Like, when I was 10 years old, I bought remember iron-on stores?
Yes.
I picked out one that had that quote, a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle. I was 10 years old.
Wow.
I know. And I would wear it so proudly. And I think I just have this natural, like, whatever, just desire to like protect and speak out for women in some way. And that really drives my comedy. Because if someone said, oh, you can't do that, you just need to focus on comedy. I don't know if I wouldn't even want to do it. I have jokes that are non-feminist. I have a lot of jokes about dating, but those just really like, I don't know, they just fuel me.
So I'm obviously interested in this stuff. Let me ask a couple other questions that are sort of related. So you're working on this memoir, and it's the subtitle's How I Learned to Dance Salsa and Avoid Real Life. So you have this sort of thread that I'm noticing about avoiding real life, right? From the way you answered.
Real life as defined
by society.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Which is white picket fences
Yeah.
and 9-to-5 jobs.
The dream,
and,
yeah.
Exactly, kind of thing. So starting all the way back where you answered the question, the open, about being sort of retired and taking classes all the time, to this stuff that we've talked about through and through. Where do you think this is sort of, I don't want to call it aversion to real life, but this sense of being away from it and celebrating it in your jokes, in your writing, and so on? So tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, I mean, I think, like I said, I grew up with a single mom. I mean, she later got married and had kids and became very like kind of white picket fence, which I didn't grow up with that mom. She kind of changed. But she was a lot younger when I was born. My dad has 4 sisters and my mom has 2 sisters. I grew up with like a lot of really strong women. And I think that I just grew up in a really strong mother who just really instilled in me this very determined woman to just kind of do what I want with my life, despite the fact that she also put an insane amount of pressure on me to have children. And I think I just knew on some level, like, I can't do both. Like, I just don't have it in me. And I think I just felt like this artistic calling was just like so strong. And also just probably didn't trust that, like, oh, if I marry a guy, I'm still going to be able to do all this other stuff. Like, I just didn't have faith in it. But I think part of the celebrational part of it is, like, I want young women, because it's amazing how many young women, I mean, people think that marriage rates are going down, but they're actually not, because it's like the Christian community. There's actually like a lot of weddings, and a lot of young people, young women feel like this is how they have to live their life. And I have so many young women come up to me and just like, I love your jokes. I love what you're talking about, because I don't know if I want to get married and have children. There's nothing sadder than making a decision that you don't necessarily want because you feel like you have to. And I just feel like celebrating the fact, the whole idea that you can live however you want, like how men live, you know, just you can do what you want. And I feel like celebrating that so that younger women know that they have choices.
Yeah. So, I mean, to me, this is not wholly a female issue, right? Because obviously men get married too, men have kids. I mean,
yes,
the burden
I appreciate
is less
that.
so on the man when it comes to children, but they have their own set of challenges.
Yeah, and I can appreciate that.
The patriarchy
puts pressure on
men also. It's both sexes suffer. But I think, I mean, what you're saying kind of resonates.
I think men identify with that in me as well. Like, I don't think it's just women.
Yes.
I think that I get it from men and women, but probably women are more likely to talk to me about it more specifically.
You talk about the pressure that women have in the world. So, imagine where women feel pressure to get married and have children, and men want to be with these women. And so there's guys, I think, a lot of times where they have children, not because they want to have children, they have children because they don't want to lose.
Same thing with women. Yeah. I feel like a lot of women I know, their husbands were the ones who wanted to have children. Yeah, and I actually read a statistic somewhere that it is men now who more often want to have children.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. But women probably feel more pressure because, as you get older, it gets harder.
Yes.
So the pressure to make that decision when you're younger is greater for a woman.
Yeah. Men have the luxury of waiting and seeing.
Yeah.
In that sense. So you were joking about being retired, and I said, I don't think you can do that. I said that based upon my research on you, but also...
You know me so well.
Jen, when someone puts a lot of stuff out in the world, you get to know them.
Scary.
But Jen also told me you're one of the hardest working comics in LA.
Oh, wow. It's very sweet of her.
Yes.
I am not.
Okay.
But I'm glad
so why
she
would
thinks
she say that then?
I mean, I do work hard enough. I do think you need to get up 3 to 4 times a week.
So originally, I have to come up with a title for the episode. So my working title up until just now was Preparing for Retirement with Solange Castro. But I think it is now called Working Hard Enough.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, I do believe that if I need to go up minimum 3 times a week to not get rusty. And I think that because a comic told me that, and it was one of those things where it's like got ingrained in my psyche. So yeah, I do a lot of mics and shows that you might not necessarily want to go to sometimes. And I'll just get up there and I'll just run my set because I think you have to just run it to like get it in your muscle memory. So yeah, I'm glad she thinks I work hard. I think I work hard too. I think honestly, a lot of it is I enjoy doing it too. It
doesn't feel like work.
Yeah.
That's how my life. This is for the listener. It's 6 p.m. on the summer and a Saturday in Los Angeles. It's beautiful outside. And what are we doing?
Oh, yeah. Podcasting.
We're taping a podcast.
Yeah. I just came from an open mic.
Yeah, right. So clearly this is not, and neither of us is being paid to do this.
Yeah.
And so this is not done because it's work. It's done.
2 days ago, I did a podcast in a car with the AC on before a show. And that was great too.
What you're saying, this is great.
Everything, what?
You're saying this is
great?
great?
Oh, this is great. And I do feel like I did with that podcast kind of like a vomiting forth of all my, it's sort of like comedy therapy. So I apologize if any of it sounded kind of emotional.
I don't think you have anything to apologize for.
I know, I'm such a woman.
I do not
I'm
think
sorry.
You've said. Oh, last thing I want to talk about was your dancing, right? So not only are you pursuing comedy, but you are also an accomplished dancer and instructor.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I dance. I'm beyond intermediate, but at this point,
hold on. So beyond intermediate, last I checked, is expert.
There's levels of expert. But anyway, I've been dancing for a long time and I do it recreationally. I did teach a bunch of young kids at a summer camp this week to dance salsa.
You have some YouTube videos or videos of you teaching people.
Videos. Yeah. I had a series called Teaching Comics to Dance Salsa. Right. I actually teach Maria Bamford in one of them.
Oh, neat.
So that's kind of a funny... You don't need to know a lot to make a funny video when you're teaching dance to a comic.
I can imagine. It's a perfect platform,
Yeah.
so to speak. So this is going to sound weird, but what is it about dance that compels you?
I mean, I'm actually quite a physical person. I always did sports and stuff, and I am half Mexican. I grew up listening to Latin music and salsa. I just always wanted to dance, and then I just got really into it. And I actually, if I could go back in time, I probably would have studied dance. Like I probably would have gone to community college and just studied dance. Like I just love it so much.
And what is it about salsa?
I think it was the music. I don't love all salsa. I mean, I like actually mambo more now, but I just love the music. It's a Latin culture and I'm Latina. So, I mean, it makes sense.
Yes, right. That makes sense. That makes good sense. Any overlap between dancing and comedy in terms
None.
of in terms of skills, in terms of perspective, in terms
Zero.
of lessons? Is that true?
I always say that there's no irony in salsa dancing.
That's funny.
And there's a lot of irony in comedy. So I
So
think
they're
that's
truly
why
independent. They're like different,
Very.
completely different buckets in your life, different
no
friends.
comedians
different
and salsa.
and yet you still brought them together.
Yeah. I actually dance on the promenade on Sundays. I have a show at the West Side Theater, which is also on the promenade. So like my salsa friends are going to come and see my comedy show.
Wow.
But yeah, I know there's zero overlap. It's
Um,
very interesting. But I think that doing a physical activity is great for creative. I think it grounds you. I don't know if you study creativity, but I really think that when you're physically active, it can open up things in your brain. And I think that dancing salsa just really helped me with my creativity.
I agree. I mean, also, I think obviously dancing is good for your health and being healthy is good for creativity.
Yeah.
But I think also this idea of being sort of fixated on something else away from your problem allows this.
Exactly.
Yeah. I'm working on a book and all of these episodes get transcribed. So I go back through transcriptions sometimes for
It's so
little
cool.
nuggets. And obviously it doesn't have to be dancing per se, but I was revisiting a conversation I had with Will Anderson, this really great Aussie comic. And he talks about working at his desk and then at some point he gets up and cleans the pool.
I'm a big house cleaner.
Yeah, and
so
then
I
how that
understand.
helps him with his creative process. So I think we're going to wrap up here because it is 6:00 on a Saturday and we have other things that we want to do. But I have two quick questions for you. So you have been blogging for 16 years.
Yeah, I have to say in the last year or two, I post a lot of stuff, but I don't quite do it with the same, not every year had as much posts or zeal to it.
So
Like,
it's losing
come and
a little
went.
bit of...
Well, I've been drawing cartoons lately, so I've been posting those.
Oh, fun.
And I post like shows, or I'll write something, but I think a lot of my writing energy has gone into my jokes. And sometimes I'll take all my jokes and I'll create like a little essay, or it's sort of like it's like a notebook.
I see.
It's like
A
a
public
diary.
notebook.
Yeah.
Neat.
Yeah.
I think that's great. And then one thing that you're reading, watching, or listening to.
Oh my God.
That's great.
BoJack
That's great.
Horseman season 5.
All right.
It's just, I actually finished it for the second time. I mean, that show is brilliant. If it doesn't win a lot of Emmys, I just don't know what I'm going to do.
So I've heard that BoJack doesn't come up. I ask that question of everyone. BoJack doesn't come up very much, but I've
That's
heard from
shocking.
lots of people in comedy about how wonderful the show is. If you're going to make a case for someone listening, why they should, because I will tell you this: BoJack Horseman is not an obvious choice in the sense of for someone to say, "I'm going to sit down and take a gamble on this animated show where the lead is a horse,
An animated horse.
Yeah. So make the case, and then we'll
It
close.
is, I mean, it is dark. I mean, it
Okay.
is dark and deep. And it's about show business, but it goes into all kinds of directions. And I can tell, I know one of the writers I used to watch do improv, and she's brilliant. And it's obviously like improv people, because it goes into all, it's like they just took like some improv exercises and went crazy with them. And there's no limits to it.
I see.
In any way. But at the end of the day, like season 5 addresses basically all the, and it was written before 2017, or maybe in 2017, but it addresses all the, #MeToo issues. BoJack becomes a feminist,
I see.
because he's like, the problem with feminism is that men weren't doing it.
Yes.
And it makes fun of True Detective, which I love because I hated that show. True Detective.
I see.
It's like satirizes True Detective so brilliantly, and I can't, that whole like macho, auteur kind of, like, I just can't stand it. It's just brilliant on so many levels, and it talks about all these like issues like so amazingly. It's not pandering to anyone. It's really like has this like voice. And I actually find quite a bit of Netflix and Amazon content just like, I can't even watch it anymore.
It's pretty, it shoots down the middle a lot.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
that's perfect.
That's right.
Yeah.
They have big audiences. They're not niche.
Right. But BoJack Horseman's like...
Very niche.
Yes.
Yeah. That's great. Solange, I knew this would be fun because I trust Jen O'Donnell's judgment. She has not failed us.
Yeah, Jen is an amazing woman and amazing resource, like for people, things, anything.
That's great. Well, I'm excited to read your book when it comes out.
Thank you.
Salsa Chica.
And I just want to plug my play will be out at the end of the month. It's called Changes in the Mating Strategies of White People.
All right. I look forward to that too, especially because I may be going through them. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much for having me. This is great.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to visit petermcgraw.org for more information about our guest, show notes, and social media links. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share with others. Join Dr. Peter McGraw next week for another fun, fascinating conversation on I'm Not Joking.
Yo.